Hello, and welcome to Fashion, Building Professional Pathways. This session is part of Hamilton Arts Council's Professional Development Series in 2021. Hamilton Arts Council serves arts communities within the greater Hamilton area, including Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough, Glanbrook, Hamilton, Stony Creek, Waterdown, and Six Nations of the Grand River. This area is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. The land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Hamilton Arts Council envision a dynamic arts and creative industries community that is innovative, impactful, diverse, and professionally sustainable. I hope you've had an opportunity to explore all of the upcoming professional development sessions and past sessions that have taken place between October and December in 2021. You can find these via our website, www.hamiltonartscouncil.ca, click Programs and then Professional Development. All sessions are free to attend and presented in partnership with the City of Hamilton's Tourism and Culture Division. At this point, I will invite today's panelists to introduce themselves and let us know where they are zooming in from today, starting with Sumit.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sumit Nagi. I'm the owner and creative for Goat Vintage, and I'm currently dialing in from my studio in the Cotton Factory in Hamilton.
Great, glad to have you here, Sumit. And Leslie.
Good afternoon. I'm Leslie Smith-Aragona, and I am the designer and owner of the Thrift Designer, and I'm located in my studio in the Cotton Factory, Hamilton as well.
Thanks for being here, Leslie. Great to see you. And Angela.
Nancy, hello. My name is Angela DeMontigny. I am of Cree Métis heritage and have been living in, working in the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and the Mississaugas for the last 25 plus years. I am a fashion designer, artist, mentor, advocate, and consultant for Indigenous women entrepreneurship and Indigenous art, and the founder of Young Native Fashion Inc. and Lodge Soy Candles, and I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Sumit, maybe you could start us off just talking a little bit about your journey into professionalism and kind of what that means to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say the career I went to school for and studied and had a whole other career, and it's definitely not what I'm doing now. So I took a very different sort of path to getting here. So I did my MBA back in 2004, and then started my career in supply chain strategy consulting with IBM and PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then did a whole stint around Europe and worked with some really great large retailers in North America and in Europe, and got to really work with them on their supply chains and transparency and supplier audits and things like that, and realized very quickly that there was a lot wrong with the picture. And in fact, that sustainability was really not even a buzzword back then, as it sort of, you hear it everywhere now. But back then it was just sort of like, is this something we should be looking at? And do we need to know what our suppliers are doing offshore? And these were questions were just starting to pop up. And so there's a great deal of emerging concern around that time. So I was in the industry for about 10 years, and towards the tail end of those 10 years, came to the realization that really to have the sort of impact that I would want to have, I didn't see myself really, continuing to do that in a consulting capacity. I wanted to really be more hands-on and have the control myself to really build a brand that espoused the values that I wanted to have and have full control over that. And so I think my MBA and kind of the experience I gained working with retailers taught me of all the things to avoid, but also some of the creative opportunities that are out there. As an entrepreneur, as a designer, what are customers wanting, how to get product to market quickly. So those are some of the learnings that came with me with forming Goat. So and then now it's really very much about scaling the business for myself, taking it from kind of where it was a couple of years ago, one person kind of show, to now scaling it to really appeal to larger retailers and to have a presence in mainstream retail, which is really exciting part of the company phase for me now.
Fantastic. Angela, would you like to share with us a little bit of your journey to where you are today?
Well, I've been doing this for a very long time. I started out in Vancouver and I went to fashion design school there. But previous to that, I got involved in, many other aspects of the fashion industry. I was a teenager, I was a makeup artist and toured with platform hairstylists and showed, to other stylists, learning new makeup techniques and hair trends and things, producing fashion shows, large scale ones with major retailers. And then realizing, I've always been artistic, that I've always loved fashion, even as a kid. So started my own line, just out of school, and then moved to Toronto in the early 90s from a 6-month design internship that I was awarded through the Winds of Change, of the first and only ever national Aboriginal fashion design competition. And, worked with them, and it was working for the Canadian Apparel Federation, a designer division that they had just created, because at that time, apparel manufacturers actually didn't feel a need for designers. So I was kind of at the forefront of really, understanding the fashion, or I wouldn't even call it a fashion industry at that point. It's really the apparel industry in Canada, and moving it more into fashion and developing that. So in the early 90s, or in about 95, I moved to Six Nations with my future husband, who's a Mohawk artist, and with the intent of creating and establishing a fashion industry there and manufacturing. So I started a factory, had industrial sewing training programs in partnership with Mohawk College, because there were a lot of Indigenous women in the community who were being left out of, education and training and things, and already had inherent sewing skills. So that was, really great for a few years, and unfortunately didn't get the support from the community that I needed in order to keep it going. But throughout that, I have always worked internationally, wholesaling, doing apparel markets in the US, did international fashion shows. I was the first Indigenous designer, first Canadian designer actually, to show during South Africa Fashion Week. And I've done London Fashion Week, and I've shown in New Zealand and all over the world. So it has been my goal to, I've been pioneering Indigenous luxury fashion for the past 25 plus years. So as far as, being a professional designer, in my mind, is that this is your full-time gig, and you're doing this, and it's not a side hustle. This is your career, and you're doing everything possible to, make that go.
Leslie, would you like to tell us a little bit about your journey to where you are today?
Sure. So I went to Sheridan in Oakville, and was a graduate there, and started my career in fashion with Marilyn Brooks right out of school, and continued to be a designer and product developer throughout my 35-year plus career, working for major retailers and designers. And around the time I was about 53, 54, it came obvious that I no longer fit the image of the companies I was working for, and I had to reinvent myself. I had always been really into thrifting. I would travel with my peers and would never be able to buy anything, because all the designer lines only went up to size 12, and I was a good size 14 and 6 feet tall. So I'd come home and go to thrift stores and look for things that were similar that I could take apart. A lot of times men's clothing, because I love the fabrics, and remake them into fit me. So when I had to reinvent myself 7 years ago, I decided to open a thrift store. So I had a thrift store here in Hamilton on King Street for about 6 years, where I upcycled top quality brands and reworked a lot of them, and then also started doing my own designs from textiles, rescuing textiles, which is a huge part of what I do now. I closed the store a year ago and moved here to the cotton factory so I could focus on just what I do, taking rescued textiles, forgotten textiles, and remaking them into garments. And that's sort of where it led me here.
I love how each of you, where you are today is so fully infused by where you've come from, the things that excite you, either about fabrics or fashion or design. Angela, talking about sort of where we're at today, obviously with the pandemic, you talked a lot about the international work that you're doing, which I assume a lot of that is based in being active online. Could you talk a bit about how fashion and the fashion business has changed over the last couple of years? Yeah, and how that sort of impacted how you work.
Sure. Well, I didn't mention that, I had opened a boutique and gallery on James Street North in Hamilton that for the last 6 years that I sadly had to close as well during the pandemic. It was just, not custom, high-end leather fashion was not deemed an essential business or service. So I had to pivot. So so that has ended. Well, I shouldn't say it hasn't ended all international fashion activities for me, because so one of the things, and I know sustainability is really going to be, I think that's something we're going to talk about a little bit later, but that has really been front and center for me in how I design. And so in looking at how I created my collections and the materials that I used, and I always used leather as sort of a cultural and traditional material that really spoke to me. So I created, all of my collections pretty much in either leather or silks or natural materials for their longevity. And I designed in a very timeless way. So it's interesting that my last collection, just before I had to close, which I had just shown during London Fashion Week, now, so a couple of years later, this is where this always happens, and you realize you're ahead of the curve always, when you're working internationally as well. And Canada's kind of a little behind everybody else sometimes. That now I'm getting more requests from fashion magazines, and I have a dress, in a museum in New Zealand right now and on display, and potentially working with the Stratford Festival and things like that. So it's understanding, where you're at with how you design your collections. And I've done it so that they are pretty much timeless. And my customers were pretty much lifelong customers. And I would design based on, not so that you throw away or don't wear the things that I made last season. I would, keep that in mind. Whatever I did, new is to build upon what they already have. So it's my wardrobing expertise, which informed, how I created my collections, so that, you can still, add on pieces. You can still wear the things that, I made a few years ago, and they have pieces that they're still wearing 20 years later. So, from how fast fashion and the business of fashion has changed in my career span to be just about money, pump out as many collections as possible. It's not about sustainability. It's not about longevity. That I was always, I'm going to say it's my way of being a decolonized business in that sense.
And Sumit, in terms of evolution and change, specifically in the last couple of years, what has that looked like for you and Goat Vintage?
Well, I think probably just the appetite that we've seen from larger retailers to carry vintage and upcycle designs has dramatically changed over the past few years. I mean, if you were to sit across from the, from a buyer of a large retailer and say, hey, I've got a vintage collection here that you might be interested in 10 years ago, I think they would have sort of said, oh, that's so nice, that's great, but that's really not for us. And sort of, politely had a conversation with you, and that would have been the end of it. Whereas now they're realizing, hey, wait a minute, vintage is actually mainstream now, because everyone recognizes it is actually a real substitute, a real alternative to buying brand new clothing. In fact, there's a lot of the quality of vintage is better. There's, the styling choices that it offers are more versatile. You see it all over the runways as well. And there's just so many ways in which it can be worn, and it's really kind of taken on a whole new life of its own. I don't think it's going away, really. It's not a trend, people wearing vintage. It is how it's going to be now moving forward. We will always have, items in your closet that are vintage. So that's probably the biggest change, is the appetite for large retailers to say, yes, we're interested. Yes, we'd like to carry vintage in our stores. We think our customers are going to love it. Now let's talk about the assortment, which has been the really exciting piece of figuring out what is going to resonate, with their customer, understanding the demographic better, what's going to drive that foot traffic, what is it that's going to make them click online, and then taking that even further, working with vintage too, to say, well, we sort of really like the idea of the 70s music band t-shirts, but if you want an authentic one that's going to cost you $1,000, that's not really going to work for everybody. So what can we do that's sort of inspired by that, but still using perhaps discarded t-shirts? What can we do with that? So really having these kind of conversations around how can you upcycle sweatshirts? What can you do with making, sweatpants out of sweatshirt remnants, with remnants? And the whole industry of upcycling has really kind of captured their attention and their imagination, which has been wonderful to finally have that captive audience say, well, we've got some ideas on how we can execute this for you. That's really going to resonate with both your younger demographic and also, moms and grandmas that are shopping as well. Hey, they also want, have some memories and nostalgia from vintage. So we think we can really put together a compelling offering to what they thought was their mainstream consumers. So, and they're noticing now that their customers are changing as well. It's not the same customer that was there pre-COVID. So, and I think it's sort of in a race with each other, trying to build out their assortment that is considered you can really call it sustainable. It's one of those words I sort of have a love-hate relationship with, hearing sustainable. But so that's, I think, the biggest change, which we're really excited to work with.
Part of something that Angela had referred to, and I don't want to take Angela's comments out of context, was that things in Canada can be a bit slow, maybe compared to other countries. Is that sort of fair to say, Angela? Leslie, I was wondering what is exciting about being working in fashion in Canada, maybe even in Hamilton, and what are some of the key challenges for you with that?
For me, working here has been a godsend. I love it here, and I love the people, the network who are more than willing to help you move along and make the contacts and networking. It has been a wonderful experience for me for the last 7 years. And I found that moving to a studio situation, not sure after having a retail store whether that was going to work or not for me. And it's been good. People are willing to follow you. They understand what you're trying to do. They see the quality of the stuff that I make. They're getting one of a kind from me. They can bring in their textiles and say, what can you do? And I can work with them and give them something new. It's become a big part of business in the last 6 months, I would say.
Angela, sorry, and so going back to your comments, Angela, about Canada's fashion industry, what are some of the benefits of having your business located in the Hamilton area?
Well, I think it's been kind of also what Leslie said, that there's a community, a rather tight-knit community of designers and creative people, which has been, very supportive, and, being able to, help each other out, resources or whatever, and we've kind of been forced to try and build things up, for a long while.
And Sumit, I know that you're located at the cotton factory. Does what role does community play kind of in your process, in the creative process, or in kind of trying to forecast for the consumer? What role does your design community play with that?
Well, a huge part, I would say. All the sewing talent, is within the cotton factory that I work with, and I've made some wonderful connections, and lovely among them, who have worked with me over the past year. And so in that sense, I'm always on the lookout for sewing talent who wants to, who want to work with remnants and with upcycling, and who are generally excited about what to do with that. So I would say, the cotton factory has been a huge connector of sorts for me, and I think for other apparel companies as well. As it's really interesting, given the heritage of where it comes from as well. It's really neat that continues to happen. So I'm always excited whenever I hear about, a new sewer or a new clothing company that is moving into the vicinity of the factory. That's always lovely to hear.
There's definitely a perception, specifically in the arts, of the visual artist or the writer sort of isolated alone in their studio, desperately trying to come up with the next big thing. And I'm sure that perception still exists with creative industries and fashion design. They expect that you're sat there in some sort of laboratory, completely disconnected from other designers, desperately trying to think how you can get ahead. So it's very interesting to reflect on the need for community, the need to discover those partnerships and to participate, I suppose, in a dialogue with your contemporaries. I wonder, in terms of advice to emerging fashion designers, what is something that you would think is important to share today, and what is a common misconception? I mean, obviously I talk about that idea of being by yourself, but are there any other common misconceptions that you think are important to dispel? Angela, if you'd like to talk about that.
Yeah, it was quite eye-opening. A couple of years ago, I was the Indigenous designer in residence at what was formerly called Ryerson University, which is now the ex-university. And so I was, there to sort of mentor and assist fourth year grad fashion students, and, looking at their collections and critiquing them, and realizing that they were kind of designing in their own silos in a sense. And, what I was trying to get across to them was who is going to wear this? Who's going to buy this? Is this something that people need, or will they relate to this? So just because fashion design is, not just an artistic endeavor, you need to sell your clothing to people. So my biggest piece of advice is finding out what people need and want right now. What need are you addressing that is, there's so many holes right now in fashion, whether it's age demographics or sizing or whatever. There's so much that needs to be addressed and so much opportunity for people to fill those holes and those gaps, for people.
Keep going. So yes, so Sumit, looking at advice for emerging fashion designers, what are the common misconceptions? Maybe what are the misconceptions that you had coming into fashion design, and then as well maybe talking about how you look at discovering the needs of the community.
Right. Well, I would say in the beginning, I thought, okay, I have this idea of what I want to do, and now let me put my, let me just do all the hard work and kind of get in there, roll up my sleeves, and surely if I work hard at this, I will have success. And I think what you quickly realize is that that's the start. That's your initial version of your business plan or your business model, and you should absolutely expect that it is going to change 10, 20 times or even more before you figure out what it is that's really going to resonate. So go into it with that expectation that kind of this idea of your business or your approach to designing is going to change dramatically. In fact, expect it to. And if you don't change, that's probably not a good thing, because you have to sort of react to what you're seeing in the market, to the feedback that you're getting from your customers, from your suppliers. What are they saying? What are they wearing? So there is sort of this dance back and forth that you need to have with sort of your key stakeholders. And one of the pieces of advice that I got very early on was someone who came along to me and said, well, you have a business on the day that a customer comes to you and pays you to buy your things. And that's the day you have a business. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that is actually when things really start. So, and what can you do to get there as quickly as you can? I think you have to be true to kind of your creative vision of kind of what your gut is telling you is right. And for me, that was really saying, okay, there's a lot of waste going on. There's a lot of good clothing, good quality, high standard that are just, it's ending up in landfills. And I want to have an answer to that, because I think fundamentally that there's some great fabrics there that I can work with. I can make great designs out of that. And that was kind of started with an idea. And then it took on sort of a life of its own to say, oh, well, actually, there's really great sweatshirts that have these wonderful graphic prints on them that have maybe stains, that have holes, that have this and that wrong with them. Well, what if we were to take all of those sweatshirts and kind of group them into colors, and then perhaps, rework them in some way and really make them super, wearable and trendy for now. And in fact, they would almost look brand new. And then what if we were to kind of, work with existing distribution channels like other retailers that want to carry those sort of lines, and not just one-off. So it gives them the chance to scale as well. So solving the retailer's problem with one of a kinds often as well. I don't want to have a rack in my store that looks like, various colors of the rainbow. That's kind of nice, maybe a few times a year, but really I need to present a really good assortment on the floor. So what can you do with that? So that solved that problem. And then also working with my suppliers to say, oh, so you mean you actually want to buy clothing from me that is damaged and has holes in it and stains in it? Ooh, I can't get rid of this stuff fast enough. Like, we can have a deal here. So things like that start to come together, and you sort of have to be reactive and opportunistic. And I think that's also my advice, is to hear what's going on and kind of say, okay, how am I going to make my way through this? And don't be afraid to be opportunistic. I think sometimes that has sort of a connotation of, oh, that's not so good. But I think, in fact, you have to do that to be a successful designer, to be an entrepreneur. And I think designers these days, it's sort of synonymous with being an entrepreneur as well, reacting very much to opportunities that you see. And the fashion scene is changing so rapidly too, that I think there's a lot of qualities of entrepreneurship that designers can espouse and take forward with them. And then lastly, I would say be persistent. So there's going to be so many times that, even though if you've got put in the hard work, you've set up your networks and you've got the talent and you're raring to go with some really great designs and you've got, some eager challenges, but it can still be tough. It can be challenging. It can feel isolating to be an entrepreneur, but often I think you don't know how close you are to success when you're sort of feeling that way. So I would encourage everyone to just stay persistent and to stick with it and to reinvent and keep going.
The piece that really pervades just this conversation that I'm having with you today is this this very clear vision and relationship to not just what the product looks like, but actually where it comes from, and that's kind of clear from all three of you. The fidelity to that really resonates, and as a consumer it makes me more interested in where the fashion is coming from, again, not just kind of how it looks. So I really appreciate that. So Leslie, one of the topics that has come up is this idea around sustainability. I know that and so I'm wondering about what the term sustainable, what that means to you, when you hear that, what are you most drawn to? When I think about sustainability in the arts, I'm thinking about being able to sustain a career, something that is beyond just kind of a one-off creation. But in terms of sustainability within your career and also sustainability within fashion, I wonder where that term takes you. Sheila, would you be able to invite Leslie to turn her camera on? As the host, you would have to do that.
Michelle, you may comment while I do that if you wish.
Lovely kimono.
Stop.
So for me, sustainability is, I look at it as probably a lot in a smaller context, because around here it's finding the textiles, rescuing them, looking at what I can do with them to make them into something beautiful. Trying to keep my footprint as minimal as possible within my small business. But I also think sustainability, as you said, can be sustaining your career, and it's knowing how to reinvent yourself to keep up and to continue to redevelop yourself and move forward, and so that you are current as you can be.
Angela, sustainability for you, what does that mean today?
Well, like I think I mentioned earlier, is that, it's a number of things. It's like how you design, how you operate your business, the philosophy behind it, the materials that you use. Like I said, leather to me was one of the most sustainable, renewable, actually materials, but it's really using leather is, I'm recycling. It's, a byproduct of, and that's an indigenous way of, being as well, is like utilizing as many parts of the animal or whatever is at hand, right? And having the longevity of it, so that, you're not ever throwing things away. So, and one of the great things about leather was, and I did this many times for my customers, like, they wore it for many years and maybe they lost weight, so we would take it in, and became very adept at even having to let it out or adding panels or whatever, so that you had a lifetime piece, which is really a rare thing these days. So people I feel like that was a way of thinking that was kind of ahead of its time in a way. It's really old school thinking. And I would tell people that this is, really how I grew up. Buy less, buy better, and that's why I guess one of the reasons also that I use leather, when I think about it, I mean, it was just the material that I love to work with the most, because you had to cut each piece one at a time. You couldn't cut layers, you couldn't mass produce it in that sense. And so, there was, great intention and care into, creating an item for someone. And I spent a lot of time with each customer, learning about them and asking them questions, and what is their lifestyle like, and what do they do in their career. And so you created something that fit their lifestyle as well as their own personality and their figure and everything. So that is really something that I got great fulfillment from. And that also ensured that, they felt amazing wearing it, and always got compliments because they felt good in it.
Yep.
And it fit them properly. So, to me, that is, what all three of us are doing, really. And it's taking the time, and it's the art of it. And, it's making clothing and fashion for people, for their lives. And that is not the norm. So, the industry, needs to change in that sense, because it's not really addressing the needs of the people that, are wearing and need to wear the clothing.
I think I really value that piece that talks about the sentimentality of clothing and what we wear. And I have pieces that capture a moment in time, that maybe it was a moment in time when I could afford to buy something certain, and I really had that sense of, oh, well, now I'm at this point in my life, I can afford the leather jacket, or I can afford the type of suit or these specific pieces. And yeah, that investment in the emotional attachment to clothing and fabric and what we wear, I think is really exciting. Sumit, we talk about well, one of the things I want to talk about is benchmarking, getting paid as a professional designer, and what benchmarks do you use to determine the market value for your pieces today?
Well, probably a couple of components go into that. There's research that I do on, what my competitors are doing. It also helps to keep on the pulse of what is going on. And then also comparing to brand new items as well of similar quality. And sort of those are all data points basically that I would look at, and then come up with what I think, and then come up with sort of my own cost analysis of, okay, this is how much it's going to be to procure the item. Here's how it's going to be to basically upcycle it. And these are the various designs that we're going to be executing. How much will that be? And then what are the supplies in addition that will be used? And then what is a markup that I'm comfortable having? And then where does that land me in kind of the market out there in terms of the retail price, and what will retailers be able to in turn turn around and and sell that to their customers? Is that compelling enough? And then throughout all of this, really, the story of what you've made and the journey that it's taken to get there to that price point also becomes really apparent, because then you can talk about, hey, do you know, this is actually taken this pair of sweatpants. There's 4 different sweatshirts in here that it took to make one. And so this is why we have this particular price point, and you can really back it up. It's completely transparent on what it's taken, that journey to get there. And I think retailers now are recognizing, oh, right, it's not something I'm just writing a purchase order for, to sort of this contract company in offshore in Cambodia. And therefore, I don't need to really know what the cost economics are, because there's it's ambiguous, and I'm sort of happy it's sort of ambiguous, and I'll work with that. Whereas here, it's really direct, and sort of it's hard to avoid these sort of discussions. So all that to say, there's a number of different price points and the market that I look at to inform, what the retail price is going to be. But I think you have to have a good idea of where in the market you are. Like, are you catering to sort of the really ultra high end, and are you making one of a kind pieces where it takes you like 6 weeks to 3-4 months to make a certain piece? Well, certainly then we know what vicinity that particular piece is going to be in terms of price point. Or are you making something, 10 of them in a day? And so these are all kind of different scales going on. So it helps to know where you are, and then compare yourself to others that are perhaps doing something similar. and then figure out exactly where you want to be that still differentiates you in the market and allows others who are reselling your product to still do it in a compelling and competitive way, because ultimately if they can buy from you and profit, then they'll come back again and hopefully continue to support the business.
It sounds in there, there's that resonance again with community and conversation and talking to competitors or your contemporaries who are working in the same field, and looking at how they're coming to those price points, and having the confidence and the clarity to talk about money and to look at your value, to be able to put a value on your own time. Leslie, is Sumit's discussion there, is that resonating with you? Is that similar to your experience with benchmarking and pricing your pieces today?
Definitely. And one of the things I learned very early on in my career was that you could never sell from an empty basket. So if you didn't really look at your price points, so for myself, retail, of good, better, and best, you wouldn't be able to have a good assortment to sell from. So I spend a lot of time working at my certain price points to offer the customers that are coming in, especially during our markets. Plus the kimonos that I do, I even take them and look at them and what is a good, better, and best? What is how much work is going to go into this one kimono compared to the next one, where I've had to cut every single piece singly because it's come together through, say, 5 or 6 scarves and a piece of a sari and trim that I found. So then the value is there. So you always have to look at the retail value and to see with the customer if that retail value can be bared or not. And that is really how I've sort of set out my product and my product prices. And again, still making sure that I'm able to cover the cost of my material. The big challenge that continues to plague me is covering my cost of my time.
Does that line up with your experience, Angela? You're nodding.
Oh, yes. I mean, it's a challenge doing fashion in Canada on certain levels, and so I started out, doing not really sort of mid-priced, sort of more casual wear that, I had sales reps, in the US and Canada. And even when I was very, very affordable, I was, this was kind of, in the beginning days of NAFTA, and, fighting, it's always been an issue with educating not only the retailers, but the consumers about, why made in Canada is more expensive than what you're buying that's coming from offshore. And everyone, started getting on the bandwagon. They wanted to make, the retailers wanted to make more profit, more points. And I realized very early on that, didn't matter how many hundreds of units that I was selling, I was still having to, the harder I worked and the more I produced at that price point, I was making the same amount of money if I'd sold something that I'd spent a lot of time on and sold for a really good price that was very unique and a much higher end. So I went from doing the trying to do the mass things to doing one of a kind pieces and doing the high-end fashion that I really wanted to, that spoke to, the message I wanted to put out in regards to, my culture, and attaching stories and, teaching people through fashion and making the beautiful pieces that I really wanted to do. And, my first evening gown that I did in suede that was fully beaded on my top took weeks for me to do the beadwork on it. And I just put at the time, what I thought was a crazy price on it, and it sold like immediately. So then I realized I've been working because I had been trained in the industry to do things a certain way, and to appeal to customers and sales reps and retailers so that they could make their profits. But I always had to cut things down on my end in order for them to do that. And I realized, and not only that, at that time, it was like, I'm a small business and I'm financing all of these stores, because, the process of selling 6 months in advance, and then you have to, do all the production, and then you have to give them payment terms. And sometimes, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. I'm not a bank. And then I realized that I just could not sustain that. So then, actually 9/11 was kind of like my first major pivot, where I stopped wholesaling in the US and started doing custom and doing that, where I made my own retail, and I was making the full price instead of, a quarter of what the item was worth, so that, the retailer could make 200, 300%. So, our society has gotten used to buying cheap clothing. And so it has been 25 years, literally, of educating people about the value of not only the design process, the quality of materials, the thought and the attention that goes into creating a collection, and same with Leslie. It's like, you have to, in my experience anyways, have a diverse range of price points so that someone can always purchase something. So, and I took that to the next level, where I created other collections, whether it was a handbag collection or it was jewelry or accessories, so that they were all connected and they were all part of a collection, so that I'm selling a look, not just individual pieces. So there's, a way to have add-on sales. But if someone couldn't afford, $1,000 jacket, they could afford a piece of jewelry, or they could afford, a handbag or whatever. So that has really done me well in my career, so that, you're accessible to everyone, and, it's giving variety and choice to people.
Marvelous. Just before, I do have one more question, but I realize it's 101. Do people have to leave, or are you okay with one final question that I just would love to capture? Is anyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would like to just sort of round off by talking about the one skill that you've had to learn, that you wish you had known about sooner. If you had realized that the value of this skill, you definitely would have tackled it sooner. And then any valuable resources for career development, or maybe memberships or affiliations. Is there anything like that that you would urge emerging or new designers to consider? Leslie, is there anything in that resonates with you?
Right. Well, social media has been a real learning curve for me, and I'm still trying to learn it and trying to keep up with it. So that I've noticed as a small business owner is actually really crucial. And I don't feel I do it well. I am trying. It's balancing your time has become one of the things that is the hardest to do. Sometimes having to give in and let someone else pick up some pieces for you can be hard, because you don't want to let go of anything, because it's your baby, it's your thing. One of the things that I found really helpful for me was I participated in a lot of the workshops that Commotion was offering about 4 or 5 years ago. And then through the pandemic, the city, through Debbie Spence and the consultant Melanie Sokat, I think it was her last name, offered. And I learned all about having a business canvas model. And that tool, I do a postmortem every January on my business with that tool, and makes me re-look at where I'm going, what I'm doing, to what my revenue streams are going to be for the following year. And it really has been a main staple for me. And it even helped me close my store and help me make the decision to go in studio. And so that has been the best tool for me as a small business.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And we will I will include in the closing slide each of the panelists' websites and information. You can learn more about them, and then any of these reference points that you guys are able to make. Sumit, in terms of skills that you wish you had developed maybe earlier on, and resources that have been valuable to your development.
So I would say negotiation skills. You know, it's in consulting, I think it was different skill sets that, you know, that did me very well, and a lot of analytical skills were valued, and presentation, and sort of, you know, knowing your way around PowerPoint and Excel and all of those tools, and kind of, you know, in-person presentations, all great skills. But I think when it came down to, you know, running your own business, knowing how to negotiate, what is it that you want out of the negotiation, being really clear about your goals and objectives, having done some analysis beforehand on where you need to be, and, you know, what sort of room you have, and understanding those dynamics better, and really being prepared. I think that's, you know, whatever, you know, emerging designers are doing now, I would say that's something that will be very core, that will help to reach your goals, I think, faster. So brush up on those negotiation skills. And then in terms of resources, I found, I really like this business fashion blog online. It's called Business of Fashion, BOF. So I read quite a lot of their articles, and they're really on the pulse of what's going on in terms of fashion industry dynamics, and lots of really great case studies about different retailers and what's going on and changes. And they're really great with trends, and also everything to do with leadership, and, you know, of course, cover a whole gamut of sustainability topics as they come out. So it's a nice one to have in your back pocket. And I just, in terms of general read, I like The Economist as well.
Marvelous. And Angela, I know that that you've had extensive experience in many areas in the arts and fashion. I know that you've served on boards and committees and groups, and so I mean a similar question to you with the skills that you wish you'd developed, and maybe yeah, the value of being someone that maybe people can come to for advice or guidance. How important has that been to you in your development?
Well, you know, I don't know if there's a skill necessarily that I felt that I lacked in the beginning. I think it was a lack of really understanding what it takes to be a fashion designer. And really, it's very difficult to do it alone and do it on your own. So so leading from that, I would say to anyone wanting to have their own design business, to intern with another designer first. Learn how it actually works, see the challenges that they face. Really, I am, you know, post-secondary education is great, but in my personal opinion, fashion design is, or a fashion business is, a hands-on thing. That anything that I really learned that was valuable was actually having to do it and experiencing it and traveling and working with other people. You know, I think probably one of my most valuable experiences was in my very early days. And I was in my early 20s when I first started my first fashion business in Vancouver. And I traveled with my sales rep all across BC. And so what that did was and of course at that time I had no idea how valuable that experience was, or that education, but I learned how to present a collection to buyers. which is completely different than working with consumers. So, and this is something that I say on any, advisory committee, with Humber's fashion program or Ryerson or wherever, is that the need to learn how to sell. And I think it's not taught. And that is the most crucial thing that you need as a business owner and for your collection. Not only do you need to learn how to sell yourself and your designs, but your ideas and your clothes to whomever is going to buy them. That is absolutely crucial, because there's no one that sells it better than yourself. So, and sadly, I never had a mentor. I was doing something really new, and there was really no one that could help me. So I really had, to learn, the road, myself. So that's why I love mentoring, because I can share, my experiences, and, hopefully, they can learn something or think about something that they maybe wouldn't have, because they haven't come to that juncture yet. So I love that. And one of the most valuable things that actually sprung up from the pandemic really was that now we have a national Indigenous women's entrepreneurial ecosystem, basically, of, where we meet on Zoom, sometimes twice a week, and where we are literally there to uplift each other, share resources. What do you need help with? And through that, we were able to become an integral part of the SheEO network, which is a community, which is an international community of women business owners with the same thing. It's about radical generosity and reciprocity. So, asking, one of the hardest things I've had to learn in the last year and a half is how to ask for help, because you're so used to having to do things on your own and not having historically the support or someone that could help me with my particular issues. But now I have a sisterhood that's international, that I can ask anybody, can you help me with this? Can you give me a contact for that, or whatever? And that has been a godsend.
Thank you for that. I just want to express my gratitude to all three of the panelists for taking the time to show up today. The message that you guys have, because it's grounded in your experience, is so visceral, is so dedicated to your own values, your own vision, and I think that's so exciting, and it's so inspiring. I want to thank you for your continued work and your in each of your flourishing areas, but also what you're doing in terms of paving the way for new designers and the next designers to come through as well. It's so valuable. You're part of, if you don't already know it, you're part of a huge picture, and I'm very grateful for that dedication that the three of you have. So again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And with that, I'm going to just wrap up the recording.